Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Renate McNay and my guest today is Bob Fergeson. Hello, Bob.
Hey, good to meet you too, Renate.
Yes, you are here from Colorado.
Yes.
Yes, wonderful country. No, it's not a country.
It's a state, in the country of the U.S.
That's right. Bob wrote a wonderful book which is called The Listening Attention. And I actually love this book because it's small. I like small books. And it says everything you need to know.
Oh.
And Bob is also a photographer, a mountaineer, and he's a spiritual teacher at the TED Foundation.
Yes, that's right.
And that's where also you found your awakening within the TED Foundation. And also we had an interview with a woman some months ago, Tess Hughes,
yes,
who also awoke in this organization.
Yes, and we're over here visiting Tess now too.
That's right. So it seems that's the place to go, to
yes.
wake up. And you tell us more about later. But let's start with who you were before you woke up. I know from your notes you were in a very desperate situation. You had a drinking problem.
Yeah.
You had, you were on drugs. You gave up hope, ever finding peace of mind.
Yes.
So what happened?
I had gotten myself into a fix with the alcoholism and the drugs to where I couldn't control it anymore.
Yeah.
And I realized too that my state of mind, that the person I had become, was the same as my father's, who I had tried all my life not to be like. It was a funny paradoxical thing. I had said, I'm never going to grow up to be like him, and I did. So it was like, this must show me something about my mind. If what I'm trying to do all these years has led me directly into what I was trying to avoid. So I realized there was something else that had to come about, something other than the mind and the ego's willful thinking that had to happen before I could ever get to anything peaceful, any kind of realization.
Right, and so you joined the AA?
Yes, I went through rehab
Yes.
and got into a 12-step program.
Yes.
And was in that for a couple of years.
Yes, and was that helpful?
The best thing that happened to me in that was that I finally just agreed with myself that I couldn't fix myself on my own. I had to go ask for help.
Yeah.
I had to come to somebody and say, I'm a mess, give me a hand with this. Tell me what to do, and how do you get sober? I couldn't keep my pride that I could fix everything myself.
Yeah. And then you got in contact with somebody from the TED Foundation.
I had been in contact with Richard Rose and the TED Foundation for several years before I stopped drinking.
So just for our viewers, he was the former of the TED Foundation.
Yes, he was.
So TED is standing for Truth and Transmission.
Right.
And it's a non-profit organization, as
Yes.
far as I know. Yeah. For spiritual seekers.
Yes, he started this organization, I believe, in 1973 as a way to get people together to work together and help each other out, and from different paths and different disciplines.
Yeah. So, and what happened? So you wrote him a letter?
I saw a notice in a newspaper, and this was when I was still drinking and misbehaving quite a bit, and there was Richard Rose's picture with a little article about him. And the picture and the article about him just grabbed me. And I thought, this is a guy I can trust. This guy's on the level, and I need to get in touch with him. So if for some reason it was out of character for me at the time, I cut out his picture and the article and saved it.
What was this article about?
He was giving a talk in Denver.
Yes.
He had come from West Virginia to meet another fellow in TAT in Denver and to give a talk. So they had a little advertisement for it. So I cut this out and wrote him a letter. And I was so surprised that he wrote back. And in his handwriting on old hotel stationery. And I thought, well, this guy actually talks to people, one-on-one.
So you basically told him how you feel and about your desperation, or you
Yes,
didn't want it to be your father anymore?
Yes, I didn't get into details like that with him, but I just asked him if I could come see him sometime and if he was on the level and where I could get his books, just to try to open up communication. And I think we wrote back and forth maybe once every 6 months or so for several years until I was sober and thought I was in good enough shape to go actually meet him face to face in West Virginia.
So what helped you to become sober?
I think the main thing was the surrender. And when I was in the rehab, I just finally gave up on trying to control things. I had an incident happened in rehab. I had a neighbor, he had done this for me before. I had him drive me to an alcohol recovery center.
Yeah.
And dropped me out. And I went in and just said, I'm a wreck. You know, I can't take care of myself. And as I was laying in the drunk tank, so to speak, with the other drunks, I had an alcoholic seizure, which I didn't know what it was at the time, but it's like a case of paralysis. And I just surrendered. I thought I was dying. And I thought, well, this is it, you know, just give up, it's over. And when that happened, something broke. And I realized that there was a higher power and that there was something to count on for help. And after that moment, I knew that I was cured. I knew that I wasn't cured in the sense that I'm not an alcoholic anymore, but I knew that I had a chance at it, which I'd never had before. So after that moment in the rehab there, I knew that I could be okay. And it gave me the confidence to go out and start being proactive about being sober in my spiritual life.
Yeah. So basically you were able to stop drinking after that experience?
Yes. It's been 22 years now.
It has been 22 years?
Yeah, since I've had a drink, yeah.
And you never drink anything, or you have sometimes a glass?
No, I've had a few sips at, toast in different cases. And I work as a waiter, so I sometimes have to smell the wine. See if it's okay.
Yeah, because they say just one sip and you fall back again. It's the same with smokers.
It could be. I quit and started back up enough to know that how it works. So I'm careful with it.
Okay, so you became sober and then you decided to become a disciple or from Richard Ross?
Yes, I decided I needed to meet him face to face. I had the confidence and knew it was time, and went to West Virginia and went to a TAT meeting. There's 4 annual meetings there that we have, and I went there and got to meet him face to face, and it was quite remarkable.
So what did they do there?
You know, the meetings at that time were mainly we would get together with Rose and in a big group, and he would a lot of times tell us stories in order to get points across. And he would tell us how things had happened to him, and we'd just get to know people.
Yeah.
I think the big thing that I found from getting to know him at the meetings was just to be in his presence. I had found up until that point that I didn't know what I thought a real man was, an actualized human being.
Yes.
And I thought if I could only sit in a room with a man who had found himself, then I would know what it felt like. That I didn't know what it felt like in here. And sitting in a room with Richard Rose, all of a sudden I felt it. And I went, this guy's got what I've been looking for.
But
I could tell it.
So did you know what you were looking for?
I knew that I was looking for something that I had had before and lost it.
How did you know you have had it?
Because I had the longing there. I had a longing for it, a remembrance. A remembrance that at some point things had been better. I had glimpses of it from periods in my childhood. It was periods of being free from the experiencing mind.
Right.
From our past, or the experiencer that we've built up with our life, an innocent part of us.
Yeah, and you already experienced it as a child.
Yes, that's one reason I got into photography, because one of my first experiences with it was as a child. And I would have experiences of this innocence, and I wanted to take pictures of what I was looking at when I was experiencing this, and I thought that would capture it for me. Of course, I'd look at the pictures later and it was just a tree. But I thought at the time that I've got to take a picture and capture this feeling.
Yeah.
And then I had that remembrance of it, and I knew that if I could just find somebody else who had found it, then they could show me how to get back there, how not to lose it again.
Yeah, yeah. Wasn't it difficult also, you know, obviously you were with different people when you were an alcoholic.
Yes.
To all of a sudden be not an alcoholic and be completely on your own and alone?
Yes.
And there was finally somebody you could...
It was very different. I mean, I had to completely change my group of friends, yes. For sure.
Yes. Yeah.
And then finding people who were very directed in their lives and who took care of themselves.
Yeah.
You know, Richard Rose is very good about showing us, you know, how to control your energy, how to walk a straight line, as he would say, which was similar to AA, where they would talk about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
So how do you control your energy? I never heard that.
Yeah, it's very, well, first you've got to find out how you were losing it. Where is it going? You know, he used to say that you have to turn off the taps. You know, all your taps in your house are open, the water's flowing out. So you need to turn them off. So drinking was one, and using drugs, not having a disciplined life, just acting on all your desires and fears without ever questioning anything.
Yes.
So this to me made a lot of sense, and I could see how it worked.
So you started a spiritual practice.
Yes.
And were you meditating as well?
I had been meditating most of my life, I think, but I could never get anywhere with it because the drinking and the partying and the depressions after that would always stop it. You know, I couldn't walk a straight line. But after meeting Rose and some of the guys in the group, I could start making progress on it, and I could also found ways that he recommended to quiet the mind and store your energy so that when I would have an intuition, I could actually act on it, rather than just having it be a realization and then just go right back out the window the next day and forget about it.
Yes. Okay. And so there was this point, at one point, in year 2000 actually, where you were cross-country skiing. And now tell us what happened.
First, before that, I had an experience, we can get into that a bit more later, but where I was sitting in my apartment on the bed just looking in the mirror.
Yeah, that was somebody from your group said to you, just look how much you love yourself.
Yes, we had
your ego self.
Yes, we had a group of us on an online confrontation group. It was how we stayed in touch with each other too.
Yes.
And he confronted me or asked me the question, have you ever looked at your self-love, at how much you love yourself? And I had never heard it put like that before, with the ego. And it just something I couldn't let go of with the mind, and it clicked something in me. And I saw that. I saw that the hypnosis we have with the mind, our identification with it, could very well be called self-love. We were in love with this little self.
Yeah.
And that to detach from the mind, we had to somehow or another break that bond.
Yeah.
And as
that's why how we are also addicted to our suffering.
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
We are just in love. We don't obviously know anything different.
We're addicted to all the little bad habits we have, and we can't do without them.
Yeah.
And his way of putting it as being somebody else giving me the good advice about that from outside just hit home. And I was able, one morning, I looked in the mirror, and there was a switch happened. The only way I can describe it. And I have been trying for years to go within, as Richard Rose recommended, and to try to look behind myself, or with Douglas Harding's experiments of looking back at what you're looking out of. And all of a sudden, I became that. And it was as if the experiencer self, who was always trying to look behind himself at awareness, all of a sudden became that awareness and was aware of the individual little self who he had been. The hypnosis was broken.
Right.
And I could see myself from where I had been trying to look at.
So you were watching Bob?
Yes.
But Bob could not see you.
Yes, Bob could not see what I had become. The little self can't see the big self, but the big self can see the little self.
Cannot turn around.
Yes, he can't turn around. You have to become that. It's a very strange thing that you can't describe in the mind. I guess paradox is the closest thing you can say before you cross over. But once it happens, it's very simple. There's no mystery to it anymore.
So the reference point switched.
The reference point switches, and you become, it's almost like you're back behind yourself, looking forward again from a different viewpoint, and the little character that you had been all your life is all of a sudden very visible and a part of the world. And you realize it was created by the world and is in the world, where you're now something which is beyond the mind.
So what did this Bob think about the other guy?
he didn't really change, for a couple of weeks anyway.
Wait, wasn't it a freaky experience?
I thought it was very interesting at the time. I thought, this is just very strange. You know, I can see myself and see everything about myself, and one thing that struck me was there was no way you could do this.
Yeah.
You couldn't flip a switch and do it. It was, from the point of view of the world, it was an impossibility. But somehow it happened.
Okay, so you you actually said he did not know what to make with you, the real you, being so chilled out and relaxed, because Bob was still very anxious and running around in his life. And
oh yes,
so does that mean this part, this awareness, or how would you call that? How would you call this, who you were then?
That is indescribable from the point of view of the mind. I would describe it as just that which is aware of itself.
Yes.
And it's aware of the world and all the strange things going on out here. It has no characteristics, is a good way to put it.
So what you say, this experience didn't have any effect on Bob?
No, not at the time. You know, Bob, and still is, you know, I still have the way the same as I did when I graduated from high school, so Bob was very nervous, you know, and anxious at the time. One reason I enjoyed drinking so much, because it would take my inhibitions away.
Yeah.
But that character was somewhat more relaxed by it, but it took a couple of weeks before the outer mind fully understood what had happened, and the emotional side hit.
Right.
And that happened when I went out on a cross-country ski trip one day.
Yes.
And I was skiing up a hill, and I noticed something was trying to get my attention. You know, just to turn around and look at something. You know, there's something you're not seeing here. And it was nice and quiet, and I was in a place where I felt very secure. I didn't feel inhibited at the time. There was nobody around. So I thought, well, you know, what is it that I need to look at? What do I need to realize here? Something is trying to get my attention, and it was the emotional side of what had happened to me. And when I finally looked at it or accepted it, and that was very devastating.
Right.
Because all of a sudden then I realized that, you know, you really don't exist. You know, that you're actually dead. There's nobody here. And also the realization that one way of describing what you become is you're that which looks out of everyone's eyes. There's no individual. What's looking out of your eyes is the same thing that looks out of mine.
Yes.
And that completely takes away the sense of individuality there. So that was very heartbreaking to the little guy, you know, and to the mind. The mind has to accept that there's something greater than it. So that was very traumatic when that happened.
Yes, and your experience, you actually say, you were lying in the snow weeping, and everything was in the same place at the same time. All is one, contained in nothing.
Yes. That was.
Can you say more about that?
That was.
What does it mean, contained in nothing?
Yes. Well, everything was in the same place at the same time, which means you're out of the mind and you're out of time and space.
Yes.
So everything, there is no point, there's no time, but you're still there, and everything is there. but somehow everything manifests itself, but into what? So everything's contained in nothing. There's no way the mind can experience this. We can, make up words and give our opinions on it, but that to me was very releasing to the mind in a way, because the mind then had nothing really to worry about in a very bottom sense.
So the mind could just accept it?
Yes, just accept it.
It did not fight
yes.
For his existence?
It did up until the point of being in this place of no concern.
Right.
And then the surrender of it, you realize that everything's okay. There's one way to put it. Everything here is okay. It's doing what it needs to do.
Yeah.
Though we can't see it from our individual standpoint, that certainly doesn't look the case. But everything's okay at bottom.
So you broke through the clouds.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's just this one beautiful being up there in the clear sky.
That's one way of putting it, yeah.
Blissed out.
Yes.
So why is all this mess down here?
Yes, this mess down here is just it's like a play.
Why does a beautiful being create such a mess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we can really answer that in a sense. These big questions of why is there this play down here?
Yeah.
When it doesn't seem to be necessary. I can't really answer that. I can say maybe that God likes to look at himself. And this is how it works.
But how if then the question comes up, a beautiful being free of any dark spot, why does he create horror and wars and suffering?
A lot of that is because of where we're stuck in our individuality. We see it like that because of our sense of survival.
Yeah.
We want to survive, so anything that happens to us, we take it personally. But from a higher standpoint, there's nothing really happening.
Yeah.
One step along the path I noticed is when you come to the realization that you don't do anything, and not just in an intellectual sense, but you really have no way of actually touching any of this. Our fingers can work, but there's no way that we as we are actually get out here. We don't have a sense of actually being able to get out here and manipulate the place. So that gives you a certain freedom. You have to accept that.
Can you say more about that?
Yes, it's as we are in ourselves, as we are, we can't get out here and poke our fingers in and change things. Things are going along as they are. Rose would say that all the dies have been cast, meaning that the script is already written. So we can't change that, and accepting that, I think, is a big part on the path. It sure was for me.
So then, in a way, we can say life is living itself.
Yes, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's very hard to accept, from the ego's point of view.
So
it doesn't want to believe in that at all.
So the changes which happened to you, like the change that you could stop drinking,
yeah.
How would you call that?
I would say that's grace.
That's grace.
Yeah,
that's also written in the book.
Yes, it has to be just grace, because like I said, we can't do it ourselves. We don't really have the ability, and the more we try with the ego sense, with the individual will, the more we seem to make a mess of things. So if we can surrender...
But isn't that also written in the script, that we made a mess of things?
Yes, I think it must be. If we can get out of the way for just a minute or two, to let grace come through, we can get ourselves out of our own way.
Okay, so tell me how we can get out of our own way.
I think the only way that's hard, that we can do that is through a sense of surrender that comes through the shocks that life gives us. I think we just have to pay attention. If we get enough shocks or trauma out of life that I don't think we need to be going around inventing them.
Yes.
But if we pay attention to them when they're happening, then we can see that we're going against our own best interests. And as we talked about earlier, if you have that sense of remembrance,
yeah,
a sense of a better place or a better person, any kind of nostalgic sense, if we can have that sense when we can get out of our own way, something can spring from there. and give us a bit of an intuition. And it might tell us a little bit about what we need to look at, what we need to do next.
Right. So how is Bob now?
He's pretty much the same. You know, that he's been. Maybe a little more relaxed. He's maybe not as worried about things.
Yeah.
You know, but he still does pretty much the same things he's always done.
Yeah.
You know, my personality is basically the same as it's been.
So would you say the personality doesn't change?
In basis, no. I wouldn't say that it changes. You know, you're pretty well fixed in your type. You know, you might be a little more relaxed because you're not trying to change things so desperately.
And what about the ego structure?
Well, the ego structure still stays the same too. It just seems to be a little bit more relaxed and out of the way. It's not so dead centered up as a shield.
Because I know in your work you are very clear that we have to look at our ego structure and work on our stuff.
Yes, we have to look at that ego structure in order to back away from it, to know that it's unreal.
Yeah.
You know, we're okay as we are. So there's nothing that we really need to do to ourselves essentially. Essentially, we're fine. So what's the problem? What's keeping us hypnotized and so connected to the ego structure? So for me, the idea of what can we do is we need to look at what's keeping us from ourselves. What are our beliefs? What are our actions? What are our ego structures that are keeping us from our innocent parts? And we just need to be able to see those so they're clear and can get them out of the way. Okay, how can we get behind them to see that they're not that important? So we don't really need to change anything at bottom. We just need to see what we're not. And what's in our way, what are the basic energy knots that we have, as I've called them, that are blocking our view that we're so attached to.
But wouldn't you say, I understand that, but it all is much easier once you have this reference point of who you are.
Yes.
Then you can look at the ego structure and it's quite clear when it is acting. But before you do not have a reference point, what do you do?
You have to, I was at that longing and our intuition are the things to go for. I had the intuition that if I could find a man who had done this, like I found Richard Rose, then I would know that it's what to do and what I could do. I knew with him that it was possible. I also knew that when I met him, and he was just a common man from West Virginia, that it was possible for me. I knew I didn't have to go to India, and I didn't have to be Tibetan. You know, a little white boy in America could do it. So I thought, you know, that gave me that confidence that I can look at this. I can do it too if he could do it. That took something out of the way, the self-doubt or the sense of inferiority.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I could get some sense of what he was trying to tell me, that would give me a roadmap and gave me the confidence to follow my own intuition too.
So when people are in your group, and just spirit seekers in your groups, you give, what do you suggest to them? How can you help them?
I would say to find somebody that you resonate with. Find somebody who you think that can help you.
Well,
whatever
in that
part
case,
that,
it's you.
that resonates with it, with you, and you know that, and find somebody you can trust, too, that you think is not going to be misleading you, and that you can actually talk to.
Yeah.
That you can, you know, sit and talk to them on a one-to-one basis, and also trust your intuition and find out what that is for you. Find out what that small little voice inside is that might be telling you things you need to do, but you can't hear it because of the everyday hustle that we go through.
Yeah.
I had several instances of this through my life that were just groundbreaking in what they did for me, but they came about as little intuitions that were very, just a lighthearted voice that said, why don't you think about this? You know, think about this and do this. At one point I was smoking a lot of pot and couldn't figure out how to quit that. And a little voice came into my head and just said, why don't you try and see what it's like to be straight? You know, just give that a try. I had another point where a voice came into my head too and said, maybe you should think about looking into celibacy. And I thought, well, that's strange, never thought about that before. But look into that. It happened also several times with solitary retreats. And the voice came in and said, oh, you know, that might be a good way to solve problems that you have that aren't solved, say, with just linear logical thinking. I was having problems in my first marriage, and it occurred to me that, oh, solitary retreats might be a good way to figure out what went wrong. You know, what was going wrong between us. Mm-hmm. And it proved to be true, and these things were later validated by Richard Rose and the TAT group.
Mm-hmm. So you started to follow these little messages.
And then put together later on, how did these little voices happen, and start to trust them. And start to see, oh, that's intuition, and that's how it works.
Yes, so you need to learn to differentiate what is really coming from a true place.
Oh, yeah, what's coming from intuition as opposed to what desire and fears are. And what is the difference? What is the ego trying to get you to do as opposed to something that might have your better interests at heart?
Yes. Mm. So tell me a little bit about the listening attention. You say it's the listening attention is the gateway to yourself. And you're suggesting to not only to listen, but to look.
Yes. Listening in that sense is, one poet once put it as, it's listening with the eyes.
Yes.
It's trying to get the innocent, childlike part of ourselves to come forward and to be the part that we're looking through, as opposed to the thinking mind, mm-hmm. or else the emotional feeling parts that are wanting or fearful. This little child part of us inside, which I call the listening attention, can get in touch with the nostalgic parts of ourselves, so that we can start remembering these things. The listening attention part of ourselves isn't concerned with the world. It's concerned more with our innocent inner parts. And it's also very passive to the world in that it doesn't want to change anything out here. It's not interesting in what we want to get, or what we're losing, or what our emotional states are. It's more interested in just listening to what we might can get from the intuition, or what we might can just see out here in a new way.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at the world and you see the messiness of the world we are in the moment,
mm-hmm.
do you feel concerned?
No, because looking from the listening attention, you see things without associations, and you see things without feelings or thinking. So the world doesn't have any, there's no desire to change anything or to want anything there. Everything becomes equally interesting.
And from this perspective, I guess, whatever state the world is in, which is quite desperate in the moment, is okay as well.
It's okay because you don't see it that way.
And you wouldn't also act on it like trying to help in some way to change. Because the reason I asked it is, some people talk about the evolution of consciousness.
Right.
Which comes with the change of our ego structure.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not something you would see that way.
No, I don't see that there's anything that in our awareness or in listening attention or as we really are inside that needs to change. Everything in there is okay and always has been and always will be. So I don't think we need to go about trying to fix the world or to change ourselves. I think the only thing we can really do is to find out who we really are. Then if we want to come back and still have a feeling to change things, well, that'd be fine. I personally don't see any sense in it. I think that if we find out who we really are, then there's nothing to change. We won't have the misplaced desires and fears that we have from the ego sense, because everything will be okay inside with us.
Yeah, it's something interesting what you just said. If we decide to come back, now I remember this one verse. Jesus actually said, "Be a man in the world, but not of it." Which
Yes.
means, for me, in my understanding, which means, okay, you finally are at home, you finally reach the absolute, you finally know who you were, and it's just a wonderful place to rest and be. But that's not the end. The end is, if there is an end, to come back
I
in
think
this body, in this world, and then just be with this world, in the world. It's like God living this life in this world.
That could be a way of putting how things are when we come back.
Yeah.
I didn't personally find anything in terms of like bliss, because bliss would connotates an opposite. But for me, everything was okay, would be a good way to put it, a place of no concern, because there was nothing that needed to be done, so there was no blissful feeling. And then coming back here, you know, you always have that sense with you. It's always there as the bottom perspective I have. So I don't feel that that needs to change. Things that in the world, I think the only thing you can do with a person to help them if you can, when you're out here, is to lead them to that spot too, to help them see how to get back to what they are at bottom.
Yes.
But, which to me isn't a sense of bliss. It might be a sense of release, but I think that would die out eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that one reason why we are coming back or why we are here is to be a conduit and help people through finding themselves.
That could be a sense of why you come back. I mean, there was a sense with me that I wanted to come back in the depths of the emotional part of the experience, because I thought there were things I needed to do.
Yeah.
And then I cared for certain people, and that coming back would be a good idea. I mean, the sense of staying there when you're there doesn't make any sense, because there's no front and back to it, so there's nowhere to go or to become. You wouldn't want to stay there because you are there. So on the way back into this, there was a sense that there was still something that might needed to be done. Things weren't finished.
Yeah.
You know, in the life, which, you know, in a sense, it's. I kind of wish it would have been over with in a way. It sure gets you off the hook. You know.
You mentioned that there are three states before we reach the absolute. Can you point out these states?
I'm not sure. What
I read it in this book.
Yes. I'm not sure exactly which ones you're referring to in there. I think we do go through definitely different stages.
Yes.
You know, I went through the stage of being what you could call the teenager ego, which is a period where we just want what we want, and that's all we're concerned with is ourselves.
Yes.
You know, and that was up to the point where I was drinking.
Yeah.
And then after that point, there was a point of surrender where I cared about something higher than that.
Yes.
And then coming in after that, there could be a state where you find that there's no way that you're ever going to solve the problem of who you really are with the mind and with thinking, which is a very definite state to me. I hit it one day, and it was like running into a brick wall, that there's absolutely nothing else out here that I can do that's going to get me any further. No thinking, no practices, no parts of the mind, nobody I could go see, nothing I could do that was going to take me anywhere farther. I had to go into this mysterious unknown within if I was going to make any more progress. But since it's the unknown, what do you do? So it left me in a quandary. It was paradoxical. I knew I had to do something different, but I had nothing that I knew to do. So all I could see to do was to keep moving, just to keep doing what I was doing. And it seemed to work, because just a few months later, you know, the realization came. I think it let me know that something had to come from within. There had to be a fundamental change. It wasn't going to be simply the addition of more information or putting together more pieces of the puzzle. And then That stage was relatively short.
Yeah. Are you happy to read something?
Oh, you bet, sure.
I marked it because you call this Bob. Do you still call this Bob Little Man?
Yes,
Yeah.
I call it the little man was that almost like that cartoon character we see ourselves as working in the world.
Just this last three. Do you need glasses?
Yes, I do, actually.
Well, I hope there's.
I've got some
you
right
have
here.
some.
Yeah, that's one thing that changed. Was about the time of the realization, my eyes went out. So.
Oh, did they? Too much light.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I wrote this poem after the realization because of the strange, almost whimsical sadness for the little creature we think ourselves to be, who seemed to me to be the little man after we become the big man. One day, looking in the mirror from my bed as I did stand, I receded back behind him, that sleeping little man. He didn't even notice, just a grain lost in the sand. He can't look back and see me, that lonely little man. I watch him and his pattern, how he blends right in so well, that his life and his surroundings are no different from himself. He has no greater vision. Desire and fear are all he sees. An actor in the TV, that little man in me. It's a sad but true short story. I cry a tear, and so does he. He won't survive, he lives to die, that little man in me.
Very beautiful. Thank you.
I thought after I came to see how we were hypnotized by the self-love and how obsessed we were with doing everything for me and our survival ego with our desires and wants. After seeing it from a higher perspective, I came to see the little man as kind of like just a family dog. You know, he's just okay. There's nothing you have to go fix about him or do with him. You know, he's just okay as he is. You know, you love him, but he's got a short lifespan, and he's not the part we're looking for.
Yeah.
But he's okay.
It's okay. What is his job?
His job, you know, is somehow or another to come out into this mess and, you know, live one of the characters. You know, be part of the play.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's nice to be able to have seen a little bit of reality and to come back and tell people about it. But, you know, in terms of our cartoon character, that may or not be the case.
But the little man is also God.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a part of the play, and it emanates, you know, from us.
Yeah.
You know, it somehow or another comes, you know, is projected right out of what we are.
Yeah. The interesting thing you also said, with all the searching you did for years and years, you realized you never moved.
Yes, you do. You realize when you get back to what you really are, that you've never gone anyplace. You just became hypnotized by the play. And then somehow or other, you know, you find your way back home and you realize you've never really left. And so the paradoxical part of it. You know, that little fellow in me that wanted to show the photographs, to show people, you know, how beautiful things can be.
Yeah.
You know, he came back around, you know, 30, 40 years later, and is, you know, back trying to show people again, you know, something about themselves through photography.
So how do you do these pictures now? You call them the Standing Now.
Yes.
It's a beautiful name.
That's a quote from Boethius, who was a Roman philosopher back in the Dark Ages, I believe. And he has a quote that the standing now showeth eternity, and the passing now showeth time.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who writes poetry, Sean Nevins,
Yeah.
and I got together to try and show this to people with a combination of poems and photography.
Yes.
Over the years, I've always seen certain scenes to show this, what they call the standing now, which is eternity. And if a certain scene can clue that into people, they may be able to see what I call the listening attention, or eternity, from a photograph or from a poem. And when we see this part, it comes from us. If you see a beautiful sunset, the beauty in that sunset isn't out in the atoms and the molecules of the world, it's in here. And we project that out onto the sunset. So if you can show somebody perhaps a photograph that shows a bit of quiet and maybe transmit that quiet that you saw when you took the picture, then maybe that person can see that eternal part of themselves, the part that doesn't move, the part that's always there. As Douglas Harding calls it, that first person, the part that's really you. You can show that through a photograph. Maybe they can connect to that eternal part of themselves, and their intuition can say, hey, this part of myself, this quiet part, this part that projects the beauty, is maybe more meaningful than the chatterbox mind part or the feelings. Mm-hmm. So hopefully it'll work. The more I engage in it, the more doubts I have about it, how much you can show to a person through photography, but it's fun.
Well, isn't doing art, isn't that why we have art?
I think certain kinds of art are like that, yes. Mm-hmm. I think art that's put out there to make money and to shock, that has no value in that sense. But I think art that can tie into a universal mind, a universal consciousness, an archetypal consciousness that's higher than our personality, I think that kind of art can maybe show us a little something bigger than the average guy.
Yeah, I saw many years ago this documentary on television about the Uffizi in Florence, where all the big masters are, gathered, and there was this phenomenon occurring where people, not everybody, but certain people would just walk around through this exhibition looking at a Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci and standing in front of them. And what happens afterwards is they would get lost. They lost the sense of the direction. They didn't know who they were. They were sitting there till they were picked up by the museum guide later. And then they were brought into the mental hospital, and they came back after 2 days. And that's kind of what they probably started to experience, this eternity. And it took them out of their mind, and they didn't know how to be with it.
Yes, we don't.
So I completely understand what you're trying to convey.
Yes, we don't value the quiet, peaceful acceptance part of ourselves. We really can't, in a certain sense, when we're running around the city. But in a solitary retreat, we can come to value this part.
Yes.
There was a trick people use in AA, and I think it was in a movie, but you can see if a person has lost their nervous anxiousness that causes them to want to drink by how they deal with an animal, and animals can pick it up. They could take people to a horse, and if the horse will allow the person to pick up their back leg and just allow them to pull the back leg up and down, that person is very calm inside. The horse won't let a nervous person do that.
That's interesting.
So you can tell a little bit about your inner state from how animals might react to you.
Yeah.
And we can see that from yourselves. I know my brother once said that the first time he ever sat still in a room was when a doctor put him on lithium. And he said he could see the difference. He said, I know now that I have never been able to sit still. So how could he have any of a listening attention or grab an intuition as it came by if he couldn't even sit still in a room?
Yes.
I think a lot of us are like this, and we don't value that stillness, that eternal part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we value things moving and clicking right along.
Yeah. From one project to the next.
Yes.
Never stopping it.
Right. We don't want to just accept that quiet eternity which is with us every minute. Well, we don't want to look back at it too, because that's self-love. You know, we don't want to allow that character we are to go away. We don't want to lose our grasp on it. You know, that's the unknown. That's stepping off the cliff. You know, and we have to have some sort of I think almost an accident or an improbability. It's something completely irrational needs to happen before we'll allow that to happen. If we can value silence, value listening, I think that can be an important first step. Because that in and of itself also means we might value the child in us. Maurice Nicole called the puer, as he called it, the Latin for child, he called this the intermediary. He says the child can see the world, but the child can also see the unknown. You know, our working mind, our personality can't see the unknown. It has no way to even comprehend it or look at it, but the child can. The child has no problem with the unknown.
So do you have any advice how to practice more stillness and listening?
I would say for me, one thing that was very important to me was solitary retreats. I call them isolations, just to be able to spend a lot of time alone with yourself when the social self is inactive. We spend enough time outside, say in the wilderness, when the social self is inactive, then we might get to know that child part of ourselves better. It has a freedom to come forth. After a few days in a solitary retreat, you can watch the social self just start shutting down. We don't need this anymore, and we're identified with it. Once that goes away, we find a different part of ourselves. I saw that this was a more primary, a more fundamental part of ourselves that was capable of seeing things the social self just has no interest or capability of.
And does Bob still meditate?
No. No, and I had a heck of a time with meditating anyway. I could never sit still long enough to practice any kind of successful meditation in that sense. I found my best meditation by far was walking and skiing. It's like if you have a nervous little dog that wants to go outside for a walk, there's no way the dog's going to want to meditate until you let it get outside and move. So for me, I had to let the dog go out and take its walk. So I would meditate while walking or skiing. It would give the body just enough to do so that it would leave me alone for a little while. And while I was walking, then I could notice that my attention and the thoughts would change. The body was taken care of, it was walking along, doing what it wanted to do, and then I had freedom then to either think or to notice the quietness inside.
Yeah. So when you use the word I, to whom are you referring to?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You know, until you've gone through that paradox and gotten outside the mind, you know, the dualistic mind and language is all we have to work with. There was a short period of time after my experience when I was talking in third person a bit because it seemed to make more sense, but then I noticed how irritating it was, so I had to drop that.
I guess we have to finish, Bob. It was a pleasure having you here, and I show your book again, The Listening Attention, Bob Fergeson.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you again for coming, and thank you for watching Conscious TV. Goodbye.